Bolivia's former inter-president Jeanine Añez has been arrested over the 2019 coup. Brazil's former president Luis Inácio Lula da Silva receives the first dose of the Covid-19 vaccine. And Jordan's health minister resigns over hospital scandal. Hello and welcome to teleSUR. I'm José Daniel López in Quito, Ecuador, and this is from the south. Bolivia's former inter-president Jeanine Añez has been arrested over the 2019 coup in which she replaced former President Evo Morales. The conservative politician had faced an arrest warrant on charges of terrorism, sedition, and conspiracy in connection with the 2019 November coup against Morales. Ahead of Añez, Bolivian authorities already arrested former Energy Minister Rodrigo Guzmán and former Justice Minister Álvaro Coimbra on Friday. Meanwhile, the former head of the armed forces, Fabio Arce, was apprehended on Wednesday, while the ex-police chief, Vladimir Calderón, still faces an arrest warrant among various other officials. Brazil's former president Luis Inácio Lula da Silva has received the first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine at a drive-through vaccination center in São Bernardo do Campo.
I received the vaccine from the Butantan Institute, the CoronaVac. It's exactly the one I wanted to get. In 14 to 28 days, I will have the second dose. I would be much happier if there were vaccines for everyone.
1 year has passed since the World Health Organization declared the COVID-19 outbreak a pandemic. Our Brazilian correspondent, Brian Mir in Sao Paulo, recounts how the country has handled the deadly pandemic over this first year.
Today marks 1 year since the first person died in Brazil from COVID-19. After peaking at a little bit over 1,000 deaths a day last August and September, there was a bit of a lull. But what happened is all of the state governments relaxed on their lockdown orders and quarantine orders. They reopened schools, they reopened bars, and they did all of this at a time when over 500 people a day were still dying in Brazil. And so during the holiday season between Christmas and Carnival, there were huge crowds that gathered at drinking parties and things like that on beaches. And a new mutation developed in the city of Manaus that now seems to be 2.5 times more contagious than other strains of the virus. Meanwhile, instead of coming up with any coherent plan, the Bolsonaro government actively encouraged people to not take the vaccine. And even now, the president is still doing Facebook Lives telling people not to wear masks. And the result of this all is that when responsible mayors and governors try to implement lockdown orders to respond to this new wave, which is now hitting Brazil harder than any other time in its history, with the public hospital systems in 3 of Brazil's 5 regions in collapse with no more ICU units. Gangs of Bolsonaro supporters are threatening local officials who try to implement lockdown orders. In the last 7 days, 1,700 people have died a day on average. There's no end in sight to the dilemma faced by the Brazilian people in the irresponsible Bolsonaro government and the mutations that are developing here in Manaus and now a new one in Rio de Janeiro spreading around the world. And this is why Nicolas Maduro, the democratically elected president of Venezuela, called on the United Nations to intervene in Brazil.
We thank Brian for that report. Brazil's federal health regulator has approved the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine for widespread use, as well as the antiviral medication Remdesivir, the first drug for patients hospitalized with the virus. This after the country reported a new single-day record of COVID-19 deaths.
The benefits outweigh the risks, and the data support the registration of the product AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine. We don't currently see any risk to the population's health related to the use of this vaccine, and therefore our recommendation is to proceed with registration.
In Peru, voters remain divided as general elections scheduled for the April 11 are nearing. Opinion polls show presidential candidate and former Congress member for the Popular Action Party, Johnny Lescano, is leading with 13% of the voter support. He's followed by 3 right-wing candidates tied with 7% each. But according to opinion polls, as much as 21% of voters remain undecided regarding the 18 candidates, while 60% say they plan to vote abstain. A runoff election will be held if no candidate secures more than 50% of the vote. A Peruvian prosecutor on Thursday charged presidential candidate Keiko Fujimori with money laundering following a 2-year investigation. Fujimori is accused of receiving illegal campaign funds from the Brazilian construction company Odebrecht to finance her 2011 and 2016 presidential campaigns. After 28 months of investigation, prosecutor Jose Perez formalized his accusation against Keiko and 40 others, including her husband, for organized crime, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. She was detained from October 2018 to November 2019 for the same corruption case. The bodies of 16 Guatemalan migrants who were murdered in Mexico in January have arrived in Guatemala. The government declared 3 days of mourning, while the National Council for Assistance of Migrants handled the transfer of the bodies to their home communities. On January 22nd, the Mexican authorities documented the discovery of about 20 burned bodies inside a truck near to Rio Grande border. The families of the victims from San Marcos, a border city with Mexico, were the first to be notified after having alert that they had lost contact with their relatives on January 26th. Ecuador's National Electoral Council has set a limit for campaign spending for the 2 presidential candidates who will go into a runoff on April 11th. The limit established for electoral campaigning will be just over $1.2 million, split between both candidates, left-wing Andrés Arauz and right-wing former banker Guillermo Lasso. The Electoral Council explained that the limit on the amount of money that can be spent on campaign events such as rallies is over $2.9 million, corresponding to 40% of the amount set for the first round. According to the electoral schedule, the campaign will begin on March 16th and end on April 8th. Wildfires in Argentina have left at least 1 person dead and 11 missing, according to authorities. The fires that hit the Patagonia region have led to dozens of people having to be evacuated, while initial reports said over 200 homes have been destroyed. On Friday, firefighters finished extinguishing the flames in the Andean region, located almost 2,000 kilometers of the capital, Buenos Aires. During the rescue operations, the remains of a rural worker who had been missing since Tuesday were discovered. The governor of Chubut province has stated that the fire was intentionally started. The Argentinian government has reduced flights from Brazil, Mexico, the United States, Europe, and other countries to prevent a second wave of COVID-19 due to the British and Brazilian strains of the virus. President Alberto Fernandez announced that the measures will continue to be evaluated according to the health situation in the country. International flight frequencies are to be reduced by 20% from Brazil, Mexico, and Europe, 10% from the United States, and 30% from Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Panama. People will also be asked not to travel to countries where the UK strain is present. Controls on travelers arriving from other countries will also be conducted, including PCR tests and mandatory isolation period of 14 days from arrival. Jordan's health minister Nahid Obeidat has resigned after the death of 6 COVID-19 patients at a hospital due to a shortage of oxygen supplies. The country's prime minister Bisher el-Ashewit asked the health minister to step down and has ordered an investigation into the incident. According to an eyewitness, members of the civil defense inside the hospital helped provide oxygen cylinders and resuscitated patients. The man also added that the coronavirus isolation zone in the hospital has just 1 doctor and 2 nurses for 50 to 60 patients.
My father and my mother are in the coronavirus isolation zone inside the hospital, and I was, by coincidence, inside the hospital. Suddenly, the oxygen was cut. When we asked the staff inside the hospital, they say we ran out of oxygen and that they are waiting for an oxygen truck to supply the hospital. We received assistance from the civil defense. Some of them were inside the hospital, and they provided oxygen cylinders, and they started to resuscitate patients, among them my parents.
Tunisia has launched its coronavirus vaccination campaign a month later than planned. The country's healthcare workers will be the first to receive the jab, followed by elderly people and those with underlying health issues. Tunisia received 30,000 doses of the Sputnik V vaccine from Russia and is expecting the shipment of more doses in the coming weeks from China. About 240,000 COVID-19 cases have been recorded in Tunisia since the pandemic started, and 8,300 people have died from the virus.
Bien sûr, si on veut reprendre une vie.
If we want to get back to living a life on the edge of normal, we will have to eradicate this virus, and we cannot do it without vaccination. This is a fact, and it is a reality that should not be denied. So we have to go and get vaccinated if we want to resume our activity, if we want to live normally, because living like this is also stressful.
Vivre comme ça, c'est stressant aussi.
Ethiopia has also started rolling out its COVID-19 vaccination program as the country faces a new surge in cases. Africa's second most populous country last week received 2.2 million doses of the AstraZeneca jab manufactured by the Serum Institute of India and is targeting health workers during the first phase of its vaccine drive. According to the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, both cases and deaths have risen by 11% on average each week in Ethiopia. The East African country aims to vaccinate 20% of its population by the end of the year. Ethiopia has so far registered 172,571 cases of COVID-19, the fifth highest total in Africa and the highest in East Africa.
On one way, we are happy that we are being vaccinated today. On the other hand, the vaccine which is available in Ethiopia is not enough for the whole community. So our community has to wait for some time. So it means the pandemic is not yet over. We're going to have patients coming to our hospital maybe for the next 6 months or so.
Thousands demonstrated in the Algerian capital Algiers on Friday to reject early legislative elections announced on Wednesday. Protesters linked to the anti-government Hirak movement defied a coronavirus ban on social gatherings to rally in different parts of the capital. People also took to the streets in other parts of the country. President Abdelmadjid Tebboune set June 12 for the early legislative elections after he dissolved parliament last month. The vote is part of the president's promised political reforms following protests by the Hirak movement that forced his predecessor to resign in 2019. The Lebanese capital Beirut saw protests this Friday calling for an immediate transitional government. The country is experiencing a severe economic crisis with surging unemployment, with the local currency has plunged to a new low.
Our presence here today as young people is to bring that spirit back to the people, to show people that the revolution is still happening, that spirit is still here. We don't want to migrate. We, the Lebanese youth, are here, and we are staying until our last breath.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has announced a series of measures which he said will lift the country's economy, pledging to bring inflation rate back down to single digits. In an address to business leaders in Istanbul, the president also vowed to reduce public expenses and narrow the current national deficit. Turkey's economy was already suffering when it was hit by the pandemic, with the local currency devaluating to record levels due to concerns over economic mismanagement and tense diplomatic relations with neighbors. Annual inflation stands above 15% and unemployment at around 13%.
We will give approximately 850,000 small businesses tax exemptions and leave their obligation to file taxes. Our economic reform package will safely carry Turkey into the future. It includes concrete and solution-oriented policies.
A British police officer charged with murdering Sarah Everard, who disappeared while walking home from a friend's house, has appeared on court. 48-year-old Wayne Cousins appeared in person at London's Westminster Magistrates Court after being charged with the kidnap and murder of Sarah Everard. The 33-year-old marketing executive, whose body was identified on Friday, disappeared around 9:30 p.m. on March 3rd while walking home from a friend's flat. Cousins was arrested at his home in Kent on Tuesday, while the victim's body was discovered in a nearby wood on Wednesday.
The investigation continues, of course, supported by hundreds of officers from across the Met, as well as colleagues in Kent Police. I would also like to thank at this stage all members of the public who have come forward with information or support for the investigation, and would use this opportunity to encourage anyone that thinks they might have useful information to give to get in contact with us.
Minneapolis City Council has approved a $27 million wrongful death settlement in the civil lawsuit filed by George Floyd's family. This is the largest pre-trial settlement in a civil rights wrongful death case in U.S. history, according to the family's lawyers, and results from the federal lawsuit filed in July 2020. Former police officer Derek Chauvin is currently on trial, facing murder and manslaughter charges for Floyd's death on May 25, 2020, which was captured on video and sparked outrage around the world. 3 other police officers also face charges linked to the killing. And Floyd's family lawyer Ben Crump announced the settlement and stated that the family's position on the matter, noting that it represents an advance for social justice.
It is my great honor to announce that George Floyd's family, our legal team, and the city of Minneapolis and its leaders have settled the civil lawsuit in the death of George Floyd. The settlement is not just historic because of the $27 million paid out, but for the impact on social justice, policy reforms, and police reforms.
Italy is facing a new wave of coronavirus infections, and the government prepares to reinforce restrictions in most of the country. Schools, restaurants, and museums are expected to close from Monday in most regions, after Italy recorded almost 26,000 new COVID-19 cases and another 373 deaths in the last 24 hours. Health authorities have agreed on new guidelines for the classification for red zones, in which residents are urged to stay home except for emergencies, work, and health reasons. Starting Monday, every region with more than 250 cases per 100,000 inhabitants will automatically label as red zone. A powerful car bomb has killed at least 8 people and wounded 47 in Afghanistan. 1 among the dead and 11 of the injured were Afghan security forces personnel, while the rest were civilians, including women and children. The death toll in the explosion late Friday that also destroyed 14 homes is expected to rise because several of the injured were critical. The United Nations condemned an alarming increase in attacks in the country targeting civilians. No one has immediately claimed responsibility for the attack. Hundreds of mourners in Iraq have attended the funeral of 8 people killed in attacks claimed by the Islamic State group. The attacks took place on Friday in a village north of the capital. Among the victims were a lawyer, a policeman, and 6 members of the same family, including 2 women. The Iraqi military said it was a revenge attack ordered by a village resident who had been driven out of the village after being accused of being a member of the Islamic State. IS attacks in urban areas have since dramatically dropped, but Iraqi troops have continued to battle sleeper cells in the country's desert areas.
Yesterday, unarmed forces came and raided the houses and killed 6 people, 4 men and 2 women. Then went to their uncle's house. They killed 1 person. They moved to their house and killed the 8th person. In fact, 8 people have been targeted. The motives and reasons are unknown. The people who were targeted are simple people, and they do not have any problems.
Pro-democracy protesters have marched in Thailand's capital, Bangkok, to demand the release of arrested protest leaders. The rally was named March Through the Sky II and is a continuation of the rally held by Pao Dai Din, one of the arrested leaders. 3 prominent Thai pro-democracy figures were denied bail in a Bangkok court Monday after being charged with insulting the monarchy as the government escalates a legal row with a youth-led movement that emerged last year. The protest leaders were arrested in September last year and charged with violating royal defamation laws after holding an anti-monarchy rally in central Bangkok.
Our goal for today's march is to demand the release of our friends, all of our friends who have been prisoned.
If the police use force against us, we will not retaliate. We only use disobedience. We have no guns and bombs. We have only our smiles and our hands to demand justice.
India will produce more than 1 billion COVID vaccine doses by the end of next year in an initiative launched Friday with the United States, Japan, and Australia. The so-called Quad Alliance announced that the Indian company Biological Unlimited will manufacture at least 1 billion additional vaccine doses by the end of 2022, focusing on the single-shot US-developed Johnson & Johnson jab that was approved Friday by the World Health Organization. India, a global pharmaceutical hub, is already sending vaccines to 70 nations.
And enable families and businesses.
The World Health Organization said Friday it was assessing reports of blood coagulation disorders faced by some people who were inoculated with a specific batch of the AstraZeneca vaccine distributed in the European Union, while stressing that the shots are safe to use.
They are looking at these particular signals and will meeting soon, and will advise WHO on any new safety signals or concerns about any vaccines. And they're currently assessing the reports on AstraZeneca. And as soon as we've got a full understanding of that from our committee, we will communicate that to the public. Vaccination against COVID-19 doesn't reduce deaths from any other causes. Thromboembolic events do happen in the population, so it's not clear whether this is something that was going to happen or whether there was any relationship. That's why it's important to always review any signal like this.
The World Health Organization also has announced it had granted an emergency use listing for the coronavirus vaccine made by Johnson & Johnson.
We hope that this new vaccine will help to narrow vaccine inequalities and not deepen them. The COVAX facility has booked 500 million doses of the J&J vaccine, and we look forward to receiving them as soon as possible. An equitable distribution of vaccines remains the biggest threat to ending the pandemic and driving a global recovery. As I said last week, one of the major challenges we need to solve is how to dramatically increase production of vaccines.
And with this story, we come to the end of this news brief. You can find this and many other stories in our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for Telesur English. I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.